Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, your #1 source for the explosive stories unfolding behind the serene backdrop of Roloff Farms. We are about to unravel a story so shocking, so meticulously planned, and so potentially devastating that it threatens to tear the Roloff family apart, not just emotionally, but criminally. We have received a series of insider reports detailing a diabolical plot, a criminal frame-up that could send one family member to prison for years. Sources close to the family are whispering about a terrifying scheme born from jealousy and resentment, a plan to permanently remove Marek from Amy's life by painting him as a vindictive felon. At the heart of this alleged conspiracy is a figure no one expected to cross this line: Karen Chandler. The whisper suggests that Karen has planted stolen farm equipment to get Chris arrested, a move that has escalated the family drama into a terrifying new reality. This is the kind of exclusive story you will only find here. Before we dive into the chilling details of this alleged criminal enterprise, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and give this video a huge thumbs up. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this developing bombshell. Your support helps us dig deeper and bring you the unfiltered truth that others are too afraid to touch. Now, let's get into it. The story begins, as many Roloff sagas do, on the contested soil of Roloff Farms. According to our inside sources, the tension that has been simmering between Karen and Amy for years has recently curdled into something far more dangerous on Karen's part. While the on-screen dynamic has often been portrayed as a cordial, if sometimes awkward, truce, behind the scenes, the resentment has reportedly been festering. The narrative that has been carefully constructed for the public is one of moving on, of a blended family finding its footing. Amy has Chris, Matt has Karen, and they all coexist for the sake of the children and grandchildren. But sources are now suggesting this has been a facade, at least for one person. The core of this alleged animosity stems from Karen's deep-seated resentment of Marek. It's not just about jealousy over Amy finding happiness. It's about something far more possessive and territorial. A report from a former farm employee suggests that Karen has always seen Chris as an interloper, who not only replaced Matt and Amy's life, but in doing so, disrupted the delicate power balance that Karen had worked so hard to establish for herself. She had become the new matriarch of the farm, the partner to its patriarch, and Amy's new life with Chris was a constant nagging reminder that she wasn't the only woman who had built a life on that land. Chris's easygoing nature and his genuine friendship with Matt, a friendship that often seems to surprise and even irritate viewers, was allegedly a particular point of contention for Karen. It was a bridge between the two camps that she couldn't control. This simmering resentment needed a catalyst to boil over into outright hatred, and according to our sources, that moment came during a recent family gathering. It was a small, private event away from the prying eyes of the TLC cameras. The details are murky, but the whispers point to an exchange where Chris, in his typical, straightforward manner, made a comment about the future of the farm and Amy's legacy. It was an innocent remark, something about ensuring the grandkids would always have a piece of their grandmother's history. But to Karen, this was allegedly a direct threat. It was Chris, the outsider, speaking about Amy's legacy on land that Karen now considered her domain. In her mind, he was overstepping, positioning himself as a protector of the Roloff heritage, a role that she believed was now hers and Matt's alone. That was the moment insiders theorized that a dangerous seed was planted. The thought allegedly transformed from a passive resentment into an active desire. Chris had to go, not just from the farm, but from their lives entirely. And so the alleged plot was hatched. It was a plan that was both audacious and deeply personal, designed not only to remove Chris, but to utterly destroy his reputation and his relationship with Amy, all while making it look like a petty revenge against Matt. The perfect crime in her mind would be one that seemed to solve a problem for Matt, while simultaneously eliminating her own. This stage was being set for a felony, a crime that carries a sentence of years behind bars, and the target was a man whose only real crime was falling in love with Amy Roloff. The first act of this chilling drama began quietly, subtly, in a conversation between Karen and Matt. It happened in the comfortable familiarity of their home, the new fortress Matt had built, a symbol of his new life with her. Karen approached Matt with a look of deep concern etched on her face. She reported that several valuable pieces of farm equipment had gone missing. Not large, cumbersome machinery, but smaller, portable items. High-end power tools, a specialized GPS unit for one of the tractors, a valuable set of diagnostic equipment, things that were expensive, easily transportable, and crucial for the farm's operations. She told Matt she'd done a thorough inventory of one of the main workshops, a building that was always kept locked, and B-specific items were gone. Her performance, as described by a source who claims to have heard about the exchange, was masterful. She feigned confusion and distress, knowing exactly how to play on Matt's own anxieties about the farm's security and his deep-seated distrust of outsiders. She allegedly emphasized that there were no signs of forced entry. The heavy-duty lock on the workshop door was intact. Nothing was broken, nothing was out of place, except for the missing gear. This was the crucial detail, the first drop of poison in Matt's ear. It had to be an inside job. It had to be someone with a key. As Matt processed the information, his mind likely racing through the short list of people with access, Karen gently planted the seed of suspicion. She didn't name Chris directly. That would have been too obvious, too clumsy. Instead, she used suggestions, weaving a narrative that would lead Matt to his own conclusion. "It's just so strange, Matt," she reportedly said, her voice laced with worry. It had to be someone who knew the farm, someone who knew exactly where that equipment was stored, and it had to be someone with a key. She let that hang in the air for a moment before adding the final insidious touch. And honestly, it feels personal. It feels like someone is trying to hurt you, someone who resents you. The phrase hung there, charged with implication. Who in their immediate circle had a reason to resent Matt? The farm sale drama had left a trail of fractured relationships. His own sons, Zach and Jeremy, had felt betrayed, but they had their own lives, their own farms, and while the wounds were deep, the idea of them committing a felony out of spite seemed unlikely. But there was someone else. Someone who, in Karen's carefully constructed narrative, had every reason to feel slighted and to harbor a grudge against the patriarch of Roloff Farms. He was the new man in Amy's life, the one who had, in a way, taken Matt's place. It was a narrative that played perfectly into any lingering insecurities Matt might have had about his divorce and Amy's new happy life. Over the next few days, Karen allegedly continued to subtly reinforce this idea. She would bring up the theft in passing, sigh about the cost of replacing the equipment. She would mention how unsettling it was to feel unsafe on the farm. The seed, once planted, began to sprout in the fertile ground of Matt's mind. Karen's performance was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She never accused, only insinuated. She never pointed a finger, but carefully guided his gaze. In the days that followed the reported theft, she would weave Chris's name into conversations about the incident with a casual, almost reluctant air. "I was talking to Amy the other day," she mentioned over dinner, her tone light, and she happened to mention that Chris has been spending a lot of time over at the big farm lately, helping one of the neighbors with a fencing project. It's just so coincidental, don't you think, that he's been on the property right when this happens? Another time, as Matt fumed over the cost of replacing the stolen diagnostic kit, Karen would add, "You know, Chris was always so admiring of that kit. I remember him saying just a few weeks ago how a set like that would be perfect for the kind of handyman work he likes to do. It's a shame someone who appreciated it so much would take it." Each comment was a single thread, but together they were spinning a web around Chris Marek. The narrative was clear. Chris had the opportunity. He had expressed admiration for the very items that were stolen, and most importantly, he had a motive. A deep, personal resentment against Matt Roloff for being the man he replaced, for being the patriarch of a legacy he could only marry into. Meanwhile, the atmosphere on the farm grew heavy with suspicion. Matt, a man who prided himself on control and order, was visibly agitated. The violation of his space, the thought that someone he knew, someone he might have shared a beer with, had betrayed his trust, ate away at him. He began to view every interaction through this new paranoid lens. A friendly wave from Chris was now seen as a gesture of false camaraderie. A casual question about farm operations felt like an intelligence-gathering mission. Karen watched this transformation with a sense of grim satisfaction. Her plan was working, but for it to be complete, she needed evidence. She needed to move from casting suspicion to constructing proof. The sting. The next phase of Karen's alleged scheme was its most audacious. According to sources, she knew that Matt's suspicion alone was not enough to bring about the ruin she desired. The police would need something tangible. They would need a trail. It was then that she allegedly orchestrated the discovery. After a period of letting the tension simmer, she suggested to Matt that they conduct a more thorough search of the outbuildings, not just the ones that were obviously tampered with. Maybe the person who did this got spooked and hid the stuff somewhere else on the property before they could move it, she reportedly suggested, playing the part of the pragmatic problem solver. They started with a storage shed near the perimeter of the farm, one that was rarely used but still contained old furniture and seasonal decorations. Karen, with a pre-planned sense of purpose, made a beeline for a large, dust-covered wooden chest tucked away in a corner. "This lock looks newer than the rest of the chest," she allegedly remarked, her voice filled with feigned curiosity. With Matt watching, she produced a key from her pocket, a key she claimed was a master for all the old sheds, and unlocked it. Taking a deep, dramatic breath, she lifted the heavy lid. There, nestled amidst yellowing tablecloths and old Christmas ornaments, were the missing items. The high-end power tools, the specialized GPS unit, the diagnostic equipment, all of it, carefully arranged as if hidden for safekeeping. Karen's reaction was a calculated performance of shock and dawning horror. "Matt, oh my God, Matt," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's all here. But how? Who could have put it here? This shed. Chris was helping you clean out the gutters near here just a month ago, wasn't he? He would have had access. He would have known this chest was here." The scene was set perfectly. The stolen goods were found in a location Chris was known to have frequented. The evidence pointed directly at him. For Matt, any lingering doubt was erased. This was no longer a mystery. It was a betrayal. The man he considered a friend, his ex-wife's husband, had not only stolen from him, but then had the audacity to look him in the eye while the tools were hidden on his own property. The personal insult of it all felt like a physical blow. Karen, seeing the storm of anger and hurt on Matt's face, gently pressed her advantage. "What are you going to do, Matt? You can't let him get away with this. This is a felony. If you don't report it, he'll just do it again. He'll think he's untouchable." The decision to call the authorities was not made lightly, but Karen's influence was now absolute. She framed it not as a choice, but as a necessity, a matter of justice and security for their home. When the local sheriff's deputies arrived, Karen was the picture of a distressed and supportive partner. She corroborated Matt's story, carefully reiterating the timeline of the theft, the lack of forced entry, and the shocking discovery in the shed. She provided, without ever directly accusing, the context of Chris's recent presence on the farm. The police took statements, collected the stolen equipment as evidence, and began their investigation. The first and most obvious person of interest was Chris Marek. The moment the police car pulled up to Amy and Chris's home was the moment the carefully maintained facade of the blended Roloff family shattered into a million pieces. Amy was reportedly horrified and disbelieving when officers asked to speak with Chris about the alleged theft. Chris, blindsided and furious, maintained his innocence, but the formal, cold nature of the police inquiry left him feeling violated and cornered. The news, as Karen undoubtedly hoped, leaked almost immediately. LPBW star's husband, Chris Marek, questioned in farm burglary, the headline screamed. The online forums and social media channels dedicated to the show exploded with speculation and outrage. The narrative was publicly set. Chris, the outsider, had betrayed the family's trust in the most profound way. The fallout within the family was instant and catastrophic. Amy, caught between her husband and her ex-husband, was plunged into a nightmare. Her initial instinct was to defend Chris vehemently, but Matt was equally adamant, convinced of Chris's guilt by the seemingly irrefutable evidence. Their conversations, once focused on co-parenting and business, became screaming matches filled with accusations and pain. Zach and Jeremy were dragged into the mess, their own complicated feelings about the farm sale now tangled up in a criminal investigation. Tori and Audrey found themselves choosing sides, creating a rift that extended to the grandchildren. The family group chats went silent, and family gatherings were unthinkable. Karen positioned herself as Matt's rock, the steady hand guiding him through this betrayal. In private, she reportedly fed his anger, reminding him of every slight, every comment Chris had ever made that could be construed as resentful. She was the only one who understood, the only one he could truly trust. Her consolidation of power was nearly complete. But diabolical plots, no matter how meticulously planned, often contain a fatal flaw. In this case, it was human error and an unexpected witness. A former farm employee, someone who had worked on the property for years and had no particular loyalty to Karen, came forward with a troubling account. This source claims that on the day after the family gathering where Karen's resentment allegedly boiled over, they saw something unusual. While driving past the farm early in the morning, before anyone else was awake, they saw Karen's car parked near the very storage shed where the equipment was later discovered. At the time, they thought nothing of it. Karen often took early morning walks on the property. But in light of the theft and the subsequent discovery, the memory took on a new, sinister significance. Why would she be at that remote, unused shed so early? Furthermore, this employee recalled that the heavy wooden chest had been moved out of that shed and into a barn for cleaning several months prior during a renovation project. It should not have been in that shed at all. This information, whispered first to Amy and then cautiously to investigators, introduced the first element of reasonable doubt. It was a small crack, but it was enough to begin breaking the foundation of Karen's story. Concurrently, Chris, with the help of a lawyer, began to build his defense. He provided receipts and credit card statements showing he was in a hardware store in a different town purchasing his own tools at the exact time the theft was supposed to have been occurring. He also had phone location data that placed him miles away from Roloff Farms during the narrow window when Karen claimed the equipment must have been stolen. His alibi was solid. The police, now faced with a conflicting narrative and a potentially compromised crime scene, were forced to take a step back. The case against Chris began to rapidly unravel. The perfect crime was starting to look like a very imperfect frame-up. The reckoning. The tide was turning. As the evidence supporting Chris's innocence grew, the family's focus shifted. The question was no longer, why did Chris do this, but who would go to such lengths to frame him? All eyes inevitably turned to Karen. In the days following the shattering confrontation, a heavy, unnatural silence descended upon Roloff Farms. It was a quiet, more profound and unsettling than any of the heated arguments that had preceded it. The phones stopped ringing. The group chats, once a buzzing hive of family logistics and shared photos of grandchildren, remained frozen on the last, mundane messages sent before the storm. The farm itself, usually bustling with the comings and goings of family, employees, and film crews, felt abandoned, holding its breath. For Matt, the silence in his own home was the most oppressive. The modern fortress he had built, which was meant to be a sanctuary for his new life, now felt like a gilded cage. Karen was a ghost within it. She moved from room to room with a stiff, wounded dignity, speaking only when necessary, her words clipped and formal. The easy companionship they had shared was gone, replaced by a chasm of unspoken accusations and profound betrayal. Matt found himself oscillating between a torrent of rage and a crushing sense of foolishness. How could he have been so blind? How could he have allowed her to manipulate him so completely, to turn him against a man he considered a friend, to weaponize his own insecurities? He replayed every conversation, every worried look she had given him, and saw them now not as signs of concern, but as the careful, calculated moves of a master manipulator. The trust he had placed in her was not just broken, it felt annihilated, and in its place was a humiliating void. Across the property, Amy and Chris were grappling with their own form of quiet turmoil. The vindication of Chris's innocence was a cold comfort. The relief was tainted by the raw, exposed nerve of the betrayal. Amy, in particular, was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. There was a fierce, protective fury on behalf of her husband, a deep-seated anger toward Karen that burned white-hot, and a complicated, sorrowful disappointment in Matt. "He should have known," she would say to Chris, her voice trembling. "After all these years, he should have known I wouldn't marry a man capable of that. He should have known you." Chris, ever the pragmatist, was trying to navigate the practical fallout. Conversations with his lawyer were ongoing. The police had officially informed him that the case was being reclassified as unfounded, and his status had been cleared, but the digital stain of the headlines remained. A simple Google search of his name would forever be linked to burglary and investigation. The lawyer advised that a defamation lawsuit against Karen was not only feasible, but had a strong chance of success. The insider accounts, the timeline discrepancies, and the demonstrable damage to his reputation formed a compelling case. But a lawsuit would mean dragging the entire sordid affair through the public courts, creating a new, more formal, and even more painful chapter in the family saga. It was a decision that weighed heavily on him, not for Karen's sake, but for the further slearing it would cause in a family already hanging by a thread. The epicenter of the familial earthquake was, of course, the Roloff children, Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob. They were now the reluctant arbiters of a conflict they never asked for, their own relationships with the farm and their parents now irrevocably complicated. Zach and Tori, who had their own very public and painful history of conflict with Matt over the farm sale, found themselves in an agonizing position. The news of Karen's alleged plot confirmed their deepest suspicions about the toxic environment they had chosen to leave. For Zach, there was a grim sense of validation. His decision to distance himself from the farm and his father's new life now seemed not just reasonable, but prescient. Yet beneath the "I told you so" feeling was a profound sadness. This was his father, humiliated and heartbroken, and the source of the pain was the woman he had chosen over the cohesive family unit Zach had always craved. His loyalty was to his mother, and his fury was reserved for Karen. But he couldn't entirely escape a pang of sympathy for the old man, who looked more isolated and defeated than Zach had ever seen him. Jeremy and Audrey, who had also pursued their own path away from the farm, preached a different gospel. Their focus was on boundaries and protecting their own core family. In their carefully curated world, this scandal was the ultimate manifestation of the drama they had sought to avoid. Their response was one of radical detachment. They offered quiet, prayerful support to both Amy and Matt from a safe distance, but they made it clear they would not be drawn into the fray. They refused to take a public side, advocating for forgiveness and personal responsibility in equal measure, a stance that some in the family saw as wise and others as cowardly. Molly, who had always maintained the most deliberate distance from the television spotlight and family drama, was perhaps the most furious. Her remove from the daily chaos allowed her to see the situation with a cold, clear-eyed clarity. Her anger was not diluted by proximity or a desire for a share of the farm. She was incensed that her mother had been put through such an ordeal, that her family's name was being dragged through the mud once again, and that her father's poor judgment had been the catalyst for it all. Her communications with Matt were reportedly brief and blunt, forcing him to confront the full consequences of his actions without the cushion of excuses. Jacob, the son who had been most vocal about the negative effects of reality TV and family fame, saw this entire saga as the inevitable conclusion of a life lived in a fishbowl. The performative relationships, the manufactured storylines, and the constant pressure to present a unified front had created a petri dish where a scheme like Karen's could fester. His response was one of weary resignation. He had long ago checked out of the Roloff Farms brand, and this crisis only solidified his decision to keep his own wife and children far away from the gothic tragedy unfolding on the homestead. The business of a broken family. Beyond the emotional wreckage, there was the cold, hard reality of business. Roloff Farms was not just a home, it was a brand, a corporation, a tourist